quiet town of Frederick, Colorado, something unimaginable was brewing beneath the surface of a picture-perfect life. The Watts family lived on a quiet cul-de-sac. A handsome house, manicured lawn, cozy neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people waved when they passed each other. Where barbecues were common and secrets were rare, or at least, they were supposed to be. Chris Watts, 33, worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. He was soft-spoken, always smiling in photos. A man who didn't raise eyebrows. Shanann, 34, was a thriving businesswoman with a strong online presence. Her Facebook profile showed a radiant woman, full of energy, always gushing about her husband, her children, her life. Together, they had 2 little girls, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. And, as of summer 2018, Shanann was pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy they already named Nico. The family was often described as perfect. A dream life in a dream town. But on the morning of August 13, 2018, everything shattered. Shanann had just returned from a business trip in Arizona. Her friend, Nicole, had dropped her off at home around 2 a.m. There were no signs of distress. No red flags. Just another late-night return to a quiet house. By 8 a.m., Nicole began to worry. Shanann wasn't answering calls or texts. She had missed a doctor's appointment. She wasn't responding on social media, strange, for someone who was usually very active. Nicole drove to the Watts residence and knocked. No answer. She contacted Chris, who was supposedly at work. Then she called the police. An officer arrived for a welfare check. The door was locked. No one answered. But Shanann's car was in the garage. Her purse was inside. Her phone too. Even her medication, something she never left behind. But there was no sign of Shanann. No sign of the kids. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Chris arrived not long after, seemingly confused. Calm, too calm, some would say. He let the officer in. Walked them through the house. Explained that Shanann had told him she was taking the girls to a friend's house for a playdate that morning. He claimed they'd had an emotional conversation the night before. Neighbors watched the scene unfold. One of them offered footage from a security camera pointed toward the Watts driveway. The officer watched as Chris stood by, arms folded, shifting uncomfortably. The footage showed something strange. Early that morning, Chris was seen backing his truck into the driveway. Something he never did. He was seen walking back and forth, loading something into the vehicle. But no one saw Shanann or the kids leave. The officer thanked the neighbor. After Chris left, the neighbor turned to the camera and muttered, "He's not acting right. I've never seen him like this. He's fidgety. Something's off." The next 24 hours were a media whirlwind. Chris gave interviews to local stations, pleading for his wife and daughters to come home, saying how much he missed them, how empty the house felt. "I just want them back," he said, eyes fixed on the camera. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, come home." But viewers noticed something chilling. Chris wasn't crying. He wasn't even tearing up. His face was dry. His voice controlled. Almost rehearsed. Online, theories began swirling. Some believed he was in shock. Others weren't so sure. Investigators, meanwhile, were digging deeper. They discovered that Chris had been having an affair with a coworker. Something he initially denied. But phone records told another story. The affair had begun in July, a whirlwind romance. Late-night texts. Romantic rendezvous. Even plans of starting a new life. Shanann, completely unaware, had been documenting her pregnancy and planning the arrival of their 3rd child. Friends said she had no idea her marriage was collapsing. But the evidence was piling up. Investigators brought Chris in for questioning. Hours passed. He stuck to his story. Said he had no idea where his family had gone. but his behavior raised eyebrows.
Obviously, it gets pretty emotional.
He failed a polygraph test.
We felt the disconnection was there, like falling out of love. The day she goes missing is the day that you guys have marital discord. Okay? So you can understand what I'm thinking about you. Yeah. What do you think about that? It honestly just makes me sick to my stomach because this is something that I would never do. I would harm anybody in my family. At all. Are you telling me the truth? I am telling you the absolute truth.
But one day later, Chris Watt's story changed. Detectives tell him he failed the lie detector test.
It was completely clear that you were not honest during the testing, and I think you already know that. He did not pass the polygraph test.
His answers were evasive. Then, something cracked. He asked to speak with his father. Alone in the room, with his father sitting quietly beside him, Chris finally said the words investigators had been waiting for.
I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Like, none of this makes sense.
I'll tell you what happened, but you're not gonna like it. But the story he told wasn't what anyone expected. He claimed he had seen Shanann strangling the girls on a baby monitor. That he had flown into a rage and killed her in return. He insisted that he was not a monster. That he was just a man who reacted in the worst possible way. It was a shocking twist. But there was a problem. The timeline didn't add up. Neither did the evidence. Autopsy reports would later reveal something far more horrifying. And Chris's story would unravel completely. The media frenzy erupted again. People were in disbelief. How could a man who seemed so ordinary, so devoted, commit such an unthinkable act? Why had he killed his wife, his unborn son, his 2 little girls? Was it really about an affair? Or was there something deeper, darker? As investigators pressed him for the truth, Chris would eventually confess again. This time, there were no excuses. No deflections. He told them everything.
What are ways that you can make someone disappear?
I mean, like, if you're talking about, like, watching, like, movies, or, like, how people, if you read about other people, I mean, you hire somebody.
Like a hitman?
Yeah, I mean, I had nothing to do with what's going on right now. I did not physically harm.
Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance?
No.
If we do end up finding your wife and your 2 girls murdered, what do you think should happen to that person that would have done that?
The worst possible thing.
Like what?
I mean, it's either going to be, like, life in prison or the death penalty, isn't it? And that's the only 2 things you really can do.
And the real story was far worse than anyone imagined. But that part, we'll get to soon. Because before we uncover the horrifying truth, there's still more to uncover. More signs. More red flags. And a deeper glimpse into a man whose mask was beginning to slip, long before the world ever noticed. Chris returned to his quiet neighborhood that evening, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon. The cul-de-sac was quiet, but eyes were watching. News vans had started to line the street. Reporters whispered. Neighbors stood behind screen doors. Inside the house, police were now searching every room. They noticed something odd. The beds were made too perfectly. The children's rooms were eerily tidy, as if no one had slept in them at all. No signs of struggle. No signs of departure. No car seats gone. No children's shoes missing. Nothing packed. Shanann's suitcase was still at the base of the stairs. Her phone was on the couch. Her wedding ring was left on the nightstand. Friends began to piece together their own timeline. Shanann had been worried in the days before she disappeared. She had confided in close friends that something about Chris had changed. He was cold. Distant. Dismissive. He wasn't touching her anymore. Wasn't answering her calls when he was at work. And she noticed he had started working out more, caring more about his appearance. Something that, just months ago, he'd shown little interest in. She thought maybe it was stress. Maybe it was just the pregnancy. But deep down, she feared something more. She had even texted a friend just days before, "He doesn't want the baby. I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm losing him. Still, she was trying to save the marriage. Trying to believe it was just a rough patch. But behind closed doors, something darker had taken root. As the investigation grew, detectives got a search warrant for the house, and then for Chris's phone. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. The affair. The deleted texts. The secret photos. And even internet searches like how to prepare for a new life. Chris had created a fantasy in his head, one where he was free. Where he could run away from his obligations, his marriage, his family, without consequence. And in that fantasy, Shanann and the kids didn't exist. Back at the station, Chris was beginning to crumble. His stories weren't holding up. Every word he said only tangled him deeper in a web of contradiction. He was asked again and again to walk investigators through the morning of August 13th. He said Shanann got home late. That they argued. That she was upset about their relationship. He said she went downstairs after their talk and he never saw her again. But GPS data showed otherwise. Chris had left the house early that morning. Around 5:30 a.m. He'd backed his truck into the garage, loaded something heavy, and driven to a remote oil site owned by his company. He claimed he went there for work. But when investigators checked his schedule, he wasn't assigned there that day. They went to the site. What they found would send a chill through even the most hardened officers. A shallow grave, just off the path. And not far from it, 2 large oil tanks. Inside were the bodies of Bella and Celeste. He had placed them inside the tanks. Almost 24 hours later, forensic teams would confirm the worst. Shanann's body was buried in a rough grave Chris had dug himself. Her daughters had been smothered. One at a time. Shanann had been strangled, face to face. Her unborn son never had a chance. Chris Watts, the husband, the father, the quiet man next door, was now the center of a horror that shocked the nation. But the real horror wasn't just in what he did, it was in how he did it. And what came next would expose the terrifying truth about that final night. The aftermath of the murders left a gaping wound in the heart of the community. People who had once waved at Chris from their driveways, now stared at his picture in disbelief on the evening news. A father. A husband. A man who seemed quiet, harmless, even shy, was now a symbol of something unthinkable. Neighbors said they never suspected a thing. That he was reserved, friendly. That the Watts family was one of the most normal on the block. But the more people dug, the more cracks appeared in that perfect image. Shanann's social media, once filled with glowing tributes to her husband, now felt eerie. Videos where Chris smiled for the camera. Where he played with the girls. Where he rubbed her pregnant belly. All those moments now looked different, almost staged. People began combing through the footage for signs they might have missed. A strange glance. A forced smile. A flicker of guilt. But there was nothing obvious. That's what made it worse. Chris Watts was not a man who fit the mold of a murderer. He didn't have a violent past. No police record. No history of outbursts. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He was silent. Methodical. Cold. In prison, Chris began to talk more. He granted interviews. Described his life, his thoughts, his actions. He said he was haunted by the last moments. That he saw Bella's face in his dreams. That he replayed the murders in his head every day. But the world didn't believe him. Not really. Because Chris had lied so many times. Lied to his family. To Shanann's parents. To investigators. To the public. And when he finally told the truth, it wasn't out of remorse. It was because he had no other choice. One investigator described him as having a void behind the eyes. Empty. Emotionless. Shanann's family, devastated beyond words, faced the reality that they would never get their daughter back. Never hear Bella's laugh again. Never see Celeste grow up. Never meet baby Nico. They had been robbed of a future. By someone they trusted. Someone they welcomed into their lives with open arms. In court, Chris sat quietly as the judge read his sentence. He showed no emotion. No tears. No reaction at all. He was led away in an orange jumpsuit. Hands cuffed. Eyes downcast. And that's where he remains. Locked away for life, in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. Far from Colorado. Far from the oil fields. Far from the house he once called home. But the home itself remains a ghost. The Watts house has sat mostly untouched since that August day. Neighbors have moved away. Others refuse to talk about it. The street that once held laughter and summer barbecues now carries a permanent shadow. No one walks past that driveway without remembering what happened. And for those who followed the story, who watched it unfold on the news, in documentaries, in interviews, the questions never stopped. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs? Could anyone have seen it coming? The truth is, sometimes evil doesn't announce itself. Sometimes, it lives behind smiles. It makes school lunches. Kisses foreheads goodnight. Holds hands in family photos. Sometimes, it hides in plain sight. Chris Watts wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. Not at first glance. Not even to those who knew him. He was ordinary. And maybe that's what makes this story so terrifying. That something so evil could wear the mask of normal. That someone could love you, sleep beside you, raise a family with you, and still decide you don't deserve to live another day. It forces us to wonder, how well do we ever really know anyone? How much of what we see is real? And how much is just performance? The Watts family tragedy isn't just the story of a murder. It's the story of a lie so convincing, so complete, that it fooled nearly everyone. Until it didn't. Until the mask cracked. And underneath was a truth too horrific to comprehend. Chris Watts ended the lives of the people who loved him most. Not in a moment of rage, but in cold calculation. A decision made quietly, carried out efficiently, then buried beneath oil tanks and lies. And no matter how many years pass, the stain of that decision remains. On the town, on the home, on the memory of those precious children and the woman who carried them. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico. Names now etched into the history of a crime that shocked the world. They deserved love. They deserved protection. They deserved life. Instead, they were stolen. By the one person who should have protected them the most. And that is the haunting legacy of the Watts family murders. Not just that it happened, but that it could happen again. Anywhere. Anytime. To anyone. Because monsters don't always come with snarling faces or bloody hands. Sometimes, they wear wedding rings. And call themselves husband. And daddy. If this story left you with questions, you're not alone. What part of this case disturbed you the most? Was it the chilling calmness of Chris Watts, the complete absence of warning signs, or the sheer betrayal of trust? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. What theories do you have? What moments in the case struck you hardest? What would you have done if you were Shanann's friend, or a neighbor, or one of the detectives? This case shook the nation. But stories like this keep happening, in different towns, behind different doors. If you want to hear more chilling, real-life stories like this one, where truth is more terrifying than fiction, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the next one. There's a lot more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.